Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2012 to 2013 crossover event, Green Lantern, Rise of the Third Army, part of DC's The New 52. As I've been saying for most of the year now, since Geoff Johns took over Green Lantern and spearheaded a new direction for the series to take for nearly 10 years that saw the return of Hal Jordan as a superhero and good guy, the return of the Green Lantern Corps as a whole, and the rise of other lantern colors leading to a so-called War of Light that ended in the blackest night and brightest day, the main drive behind all those stories is that the Guardians of the Universe are actually kind of the bad guys. It may seem counterintuitive since the Guardians are the ones who created the Green Lantern Corps in the first place, intending them as an ultimate force for good in the universe. A protective police agency patrolling all planets everywhere in order to rout out the bad guys and arrest them. Why would bad guys want something like that to exist? But that's kind of the Guardians' MO, their Mo if you will, because first they created the Manhunters, an unfeeling robot force that because of their lack of emotions were unable to recognize a bad command when given to them by the rogue Guardian Krona, and they proceeded to kill all but 5 inhabitants of the most metal sector in the universe, Sector 666. So learning from their mistakes, the Guardians created the Green Lantern Corps so their police force could have emotion to go in line with their reason, to prevent such a horrible tragic massacre from ever happening again. Only they apparently didn't really learn from their mistakes because they would continue to insist that emotions, just, in general, are a bad thing, and they only lead to sentient life destroying the very universe that they call home. Which, I guess they're not really wrong about that, but the Lanterns were essentially supposed to be that balance between them and the rest of the universe. Only, since the Sinestro Corps War, the Guardians' hatred of emotion, because let's be honest, much like Vulcans, no matter how unfeeling Guardians are supposed to be, they seem just as ruled by emotion as anyone else. Their hatred of emotions led them to begin doing their part to weaken the various Lantern Corps where they could so that they could bring an end to emotion in general. We've seen this in my past several videos on the various Lantern Corps, but I'll explain here the things I wasn't saying in those videos. For the Red Lanterns, they stole back Krona's body to convince Atrocitus that he had come back to life, and then revived Abysmus and asked him to poison the Red's power battery. This nearly killed the Reds, as we saw. In New Guardians, though I don't think it's ever directly stated, they may have helped Invictus return to our universe so he could resume his war on Larfleeze, since he was possibly the only one strong enough to defeat the Orange Lantern. Also possibly not ever directly stated, the Guardians are most likely the ones that told the Reach where to find the home planet of the Blue Lanterns, causing them to end up losing their planet in Central Power Battery. But mostly they focused on the Greens as it was their own core. Their first major move was establishing the Alpha Lanterns, a sort of internal affairs for the GLC to sow distrust within their own ranks. Next, they booted Hal Jordan out of the Corps for no real reason and replaced him with one of the Green's greatest enemies, Sinestro. They also tried to get rid of John Stewart by framing him for murder, which instead ended in the destruction of the Alpha Lanterns. They also began holding onto Green Lantern rings whenever a Lantern would die instead of releasing them into the universe to find replacements like they normally would. And their final move was to take away all emotions from Ganthet, the last of the main Guardian group to still have held on to his emotions. With all that done, they would then free someone they called the First Lantern from a hidden prison, so they could use his power to build another army. The Third Army, if Manhunters were the first and GLC the second. All the various Lantern titles running back in 2012 would then all be a part of an event showing the effect of this Third Army as it came into existence and began running amok in the universe. And that's what today's video is about. So let's see just what devastation this Third Army is set to cause and take this away. The comic opens on a graveyard in Central City. I don't know who this guy is. Seriously, no clue. Despite the fact that it kinda seems like it's supposed to be important, but I guess it's not. I think he's probably just like a random dead zombie. I'll get to why in just a second, but first we see that the Guardians are here also to draw on the power of this first lantern guy, even though they admit it's incredibly dangerous to do so, in order to create their new, cooler, better third army. Once they have the power they need, they use their own flesh to form a sick, grotesque creature that immediately attacks a nearby guard, and its touch seems to cause the guard to change, mutating him into a copy of the first creature, and the transformation ends with it ejecting the guard's heart out of his own body. Because as will be pointed out for us multiple times, just in case we don't pick up on this ourselves, these creatures have no heart, so they have no emotion. They have no ears, so they can't listen to anyone but the Guardians, and they have no mouth, and they must scream. I'm sorry, I mean so that they can't talk back or question orders. Same thing. Their entire existence is just to convert all life into copies of themselves and obey the Guardians' every whim. Their eyes do remain unchanged, but I think that's honestly just to make them look more creepy, and that's a resounding success. The Guardians are in this graveyard on Earth in the first place because they kicked off their new army building by killing Hal Jordan and Sinestro. As we saw in my Green Lantern review, Sinestro had seen a vision of Hal's future in something called the Book of the Black, a basically magical tome powered by the black energy of death. So Sinestro made a copy of his own Green Lantern ring so that Hal could be a Green again too, but when he had tried to show that vision to Hal, they had instead both been teleported across the universe to Black Hand, who had then raised a bunch of zombies, cause that's kinda what he does, and maybe that's where our opening dead guy comes from, in an attempt to kill them both. Despite the Book of the Black telling Black Hand that Hal was not only not his enemy, but would even become the greatest Black Lantern. Which is dumb. Hal can't be the greatest at everything. I mean, try as John's might, he hasn't really managed to convince me that Hal is the greatest at anything, but whatevs. The fight would end with the Guardians showing up to give Hand enough power to kill Sinestro and, by proxy, Hal, as they wanted Sinestro out of the way, and Hal was already supposed to be out of the way since he wasn't supposed to have a ring in the first place. They also teleport Black Hand to that same cage where they had been holding the first lantern, probably so he couldn't interfere with their plans since, not really being alive as he's basically a zombie, he probably couldn't be converted into a Third Army ghoul thing. The Guardians designate one of their new Third Army monsters to stay on Earth converting people there, and the other to head into space and start spreading out in space. Shortly after they leave, Kyle Rayner and Carol Ferris, who saw on the news that Hal and Sinestro were fighting Black Hand, show up and are attacked by Hal's zombie leftovers. They're almost defeated by the Black Lanterns, but then Kyle's able to channel the blue light of hope along with his normal green to dispel the creatures, making his first dive into being able to channel the other emotional colors that will mark his role in this crossover. His ring then reveals that Hal is dead, but Carol refuses to believe it because Star Sapphires are tethered to the one they love, and her tether to Hal hasn't been severed. She's also able to use her powers to look into Kyle's future, and there they see him mastering each of the colors of the rainbow. So to save Hal, and possibly Kyle's mentor and father figure Ganthet, they set off to see this future come to pass. They start with getting Atrocitus to teach him Rage, and I guess this creative team didn't get the memo that Reds aren't supposed to be able to create constructs. Whoops. It bothers me kind of a lot that to get Kyle angry, he takes him to a clearly Middle Eastern location to show him violence being perpetrated for no real reason on helpless villagers. It's notable because at the exact same time in the main Green Lantern comic, Jeff Johns was literally creating a new Green Lantern whose whole point of existing was to counter that post-9/11 fear-mongering of Middle Eastern people as all being terrorists. This new Green Lantern was a guy named Simon Baz. Baz grew up in America in that post-9/11 world, hated simply for the color of his skin and being Muslim. Eventually he became an illegal street racer, and one night in one such race with his brother-in-law Nazir, there was a horrible crash that left Nazir in a coma. Feeling guilty about this, Simon uses his money to help his sister pay to raise her kids alone and afford Nazir's hospital bills. But then one day, he's laid off when the factory he works at closes, and Simon turns to stealing cars. until the day he steals a car with a bomb in it. Knowing the factory he worked at would be empty, he drives there so the bomb can explode inside the factory without hurting anyone. But the authorities immediately jump to all the obvious conclusions and throw him into Guantanamo Bay without due process, accusing him of being a terrorist. It's really interesting that the Green Lantern creative team literally takes an entire issue to step back from all these ridiculous cosmic space wars that have made up Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern since the beginning, to just give us this perspective from the point of view of someone on the wrong side of the frankly racist attitudes toward Middle Eastern people that developed out of the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers. It's especially interesting because their counterparts on this other Green Lantern title were literally playing the other side, taking Kyle specifically to the Middle East to show how violent, quote unquote, these people supposedly are. Like this level of violence or terrorism couldn't be found in America. All Atrocitus really needed to do was probably take Kyle to literally almost any public school in America and wait for a white man with an AR-15 to show up. Anyway, it works, and though the issue ends with them saying they'll go find Arkillo to learn fear, they jump to Kyle learning compassion from Indigo One instead. Then he meets up with Arkillo, and they both help each other face their particular fears. Arkillo's fear of not measuring up to Sinestro, and Kyle's fear of just failure in general. Then they both go to the planet Okara so Kyle can learn greed from Larfleeze, but while they're there, they are attacked by the Third Army and the female guardian Saeed, who had been Larfleeze's personal guardian since Blackest Night and essentially the love interest of Ganthet, is ripped apart by the Third Army as she distracts them so the others can get away. Last is the Sapphires, who earlier we had seen partnering up with the Guardians to avoid being attacked by them, as we saw in the intro that was happening to all the other colors. But it was apparently all just a ruse to buy time to find a way to fight the Guardians, and they had hoped that Kyle becoming a White Lantern would be that way. But Ganthet shows up to fight his own protege before Kyle can learn to love, and the Sapphires decide to show their true colors. Anyway, and join Kyle in fighting Ganthet. But Kyle doesn't want Ganthet to die and tries to protect him, only to have Ganthet betray Kyle and stab him in the back. Or shoot him in the back, I guess. Same difference. As Kyle lays dying, he forgives Ganthet his sins and thus is reborn in a not at all Jesus-y way as the White Lantern. With his new power, he's able to just flat out destroy the Third Army monsters that Ganthet had summoned as backup, and now truly outgunned, Ganthet flees. Which brings us to the Red Lanterns. The Red Lanterns had only just recovered from nearly all dying off as their central battery had been poisoned by Abysmus. For some reason though, it's staying weak and not providing the Reds with the power it used to. We'll learn that this has something to do with the inversion somehow still being alive and living deep below the ground beneath the battery, but we don't really learn exactly what that's about ever, so, you know. Moving on. Instead, this portion of the story mainly focuses on the Red Lanterns out avenging a horrible wrong on some backwater planet, when they're attacked by the Third Army and only just barely able to survive the attack, with another of their number being killed and converted. Atrocitus takes one of the Third Army creatures back to Eastmalt with him to do some angry DNA analysis, which is obviously the best kind of DNA analysis, and discovers that the creatures are made from the Guardian's own DNA and that they try to infect any living tissue to convert it into a copy of its own material. So he realizes that their best defense against such creatures is a non-living army, and luckily Atrocitus just happens to have one of those. It seems during the war between the Empire of Tears and the Guardians, Atrocitus defeated an army of manhunters and stored them on his home planet of Ryut. So he travels to the dead planet now and uses his blood magic to take control of the manhunters, sending them to Oa to attack the Guardians. Meanwhile, he has a secondary objective deep beneath the Guardian's original home planet of Maltus, where he finds a wall full of lights and some ghost faces. Scream. Among the ghost faces is Krona, but what he has to say to Atrocitus and what's behind door number 1 here aren't to be revealed to us until the next volume, so moving on to Green Lantern Corps. This series mainly focuses on Guy Gardner, who at the beginning of this collection is being promoted to a newly created top lantern position of Lantern Sentinel. As some of the gathered lanterns note, it seems pretty odd that Guy, out of all possible Green Lanterns, is the one to get this promotion, but it seems he's really only being set up to fail well because the Guardians know how to play off of his impulsiveness and his ego, and Guy is definitely those things. Because in a zero-issue flashback not included in this collection, we saw that when Guy was a Lantern in training, he fought off a murderous bad guy named Zar, who would then forever hold a grudge against Guy for defeating him. And now the Guardians let him out of his cage in the subcells of the Science Cells, the name of the Green Lantern prison, while Guy is away on a diplomatic mission escorting some puffed up dignitaries who ask the Guardians to help them negotiate a ceasefire. But the Guardians knew Guy wouldn't take this mission seriously, and the moment he learns that Zar has quote-unquote escaped the Science Cells, he takes a group of the Lanterns to Earth so he can defend his family, figuring the Monster Man would be coming after them. Instead, the Guardians send Zar to kill the dignitaries and their small remaining Lantern escort, then frame some rebels for the attack. Meanwhile, near Earth, Guy and his Greens are attacked by the Third Army, and everyone but Guy gets killed and converted by the Thirds. I really need a more catchy name for these guys. Saying Third Army every time is getting cumbersome. Ugh. When Guy gets back to Oa, the Guardians, in a totally not suspicious at all kind of way, randomly choose to make Guy's debriefing completely public, so all the Green Lanterns can see just how badly he failed. Despite the fact that not failing was the one and only promise that he made when he was promoted. So they ask him to quit the Corps for being such a drastic failure, and Guy, knowing he messed up, does agree and is sent back to Earth. There, depressed, he decides to go the Dark Knight Vigilante route and be his own kind of superhero back home, just going around beating up bad guys and threatening them with attacking them with Green Lantern energy and threats he can't back up, until he finally moves far enough up the chain to learn about an arms deal going down. Only these supposed terrorists involved in this arms deal that he stops turn out to be undercover federal agents on a sting operation that Guy just completely blew. And his interference ends with him getting arrested by his own sister. That's embarrassing. John Stewart, the other major half of the Green Lantern Corps, meanwhile, has been sent on a mission by the Guardians to help restore Mogo, as they have found various chunks of the planet attempting to reform with each other. This also pulls in the Star Sapphire Fatality, who is drawn to the two halves of Mogo trying to combine together into a complete whole. Because Mogo had both male and female halves that got split apart in a straight line down through the heart, but must get back together. And that's the origin of love. So Stewart and Fatality discover that Mogo can't get back together because some space pirates gathered up a bunch of particles and used them to build a friggin' laser beam made of sheer willpower to terrorize planets with. So they blow up the ship, allowing Mogo to reform, but the moment that starts happening, Mogo pulls both of them into its core. Because apparently they were about to be under attack by the Third Army, and the Guardians were apparently convinced that they could use that Third Army to also convert Mogo. But Mogo had other plans, and used its control over its own gravity to tear the Third Army apart with planetary chunks before finally allowing itself to reform. Welcome back, Mogo. Maybe John can stop feeling bad about killing you now. And that brings us all the way back around to Simon Baz, as he leads the main Green Lantern title at this point. We had left him in prison in Guantanamo, but a Green Lantern ring suddenly busts him out and sends him on the run. The president, who is obviously totally not Obama, I don't know what you're talking about, stop saying silly things, and Amanda Waller send the Justice League after Simon. He initially doesn't want to fight the League for obvious reasons, but when they try to get him to take off the ring and it responds, weirdly, he finds himself going on the run again. Simon's main concern this whole time has been with who actually planted the bomb in the van. During his interrogation earlier, a federal agent named Fed, no really, said that the van had already been reported stolen when Simon stole it from under a bridge. So with the help of his sister Sarah, he tracks down the van's original owner, this guy named Whale, to ask him about that theft. Only, of course, this guy was the actual terrorist and had wanted the bomb to go off under that bridge. Luckily, Fed, the federal agent, had believed Simon's protestations of innocence and so shows up here as well in time to stop Whale from killing Simon. Only then the Third Army also shows up, chasing Simon's green ring energy signature, and kills Whale. Simon and Fed escape by using bombs Whale was building in his basement to blow up the Third Army, which also very inconveniently destroys all evidence of Whale's guilt. That would probably be bad news for Baz, but we won't get back to it in this series, so that's when my new fave, Bad, shows up. Who's an adorable little talking squirrel? Yes, you are. Badge is a Helvanite, just like his predecessor in the Green Lantern Corps, Chip, which has no importance to this story. I just wanted to mention it because they're so freaking cute. Badge begins teaching Simon about being a Green Lantern, including taking him to the cemetery where Hal and Sinestro were killed, recovering Sinestro's lantern so he can charge his ring, and getting him to finally play the message that has been causing the weird things happening with his ring. Simon's ring comes from Sinestro's and Hal's ring recombining, and they both apparently left messages while dying asking him to do different things. But following Badge telling him that the ring can do anything, Simon decides to head to the hospital where his brother Nazir is in a coma and try to use the ring to revive him. Badge says the ring actually can't do that, but Simon apparently just wills so hard that it actually works. I feel like this seems like it should be an even bigger moment than they make it out to be, and they make it out to be a fairly big moment. I feel like this changes what a Green Lantern ring even is. It's now a thing that makes wishes come true if you just want it badly enough. Meaning, as Badge said, it literally can do anything. But literally limitless power is usually not a good door to open up, even in fantasy. Oh well. Badge sees on the news that Gardner has been arrested, like we mentioned earlier, so our two green heroes here, head on to Guy's town of Baltimore to bust him out of jail, arriving just in the nick of time to save him from a third army attack. A third attack. A Tharmy attack. A TA attack. No, I'm not coming up with a good nickname. Badge will create a construct that can send Guy to Oa, because that's something the Greens can just do now, I guess. And then he and Simon will open the Book of the Black, which they found along with Sinestro's lantern in the graveyard earlier, and be transported to the First Lantern's cage, where we'll leave them until the next video. On Oa, the Guardians have called in the entire Corps so they can supposedly get inoculated to protect them from this mysterious new enemy of green-brained, white-skinned zombies who want to make everyone just like them. Kinda like the KKK. But it's a twap! And the Guardians are really just putting them all in stasis so they can't offer any resistance. Guy, as soon as he gets there, tries to get his ring back, but it's guarded by a force field, so instead he meets up with some other lanterns like Kilowog, who had managed to not be fooled by the Guardians' fake news, and comes up with a new plan. He instead uses Krona's Gauntlet, the forebearer of the Green Rings that we saw in War of the Green Lanterns, make sure you've watched my other videos guys, to try and distract the Guardians while Kilowog's crew, with a K to be cool of course, bust out the rest of the lanterns. Then Kyle Rayner shows up with a new group of new Guardians. So, not the first group of new Guardians, or even the first group of new Guardians that we saw from the New 52. And not the new Guardians we'll see shortly after this event, so like, New Guardians 1.3 or 2.2? I don't know how version numbers work. Where was I? So with our White Lantern and his Rainbow Coalition leading the charge, and also Atrocitus' Manhunters showing up, and Guy managing to get his ring back, the Guardians are forced to admit that they've lost all control of the situation. So they dangerously draw on more power from the First Lantern, with the result being that our mysterious secret villain finally breaks loose and leads us into our next video. You're darn tootin', so let's get to the breakdown. I honestly really like all the story of all the Guardians' secret plotting to take down the various Lantern Corps. It's honestly kind of interesting, and I wish more attention had been put onto it in the various titles. Instead, you're mostly left to kind of infer that all these various things are connected, because I guess the creative teams behind each series had largely been wanting to do their own things, which, granted, makes sense. But instead, the entire goal of literally 4 different series was just to build up to this one crossover event. Well, 2 crossover events, I guess. And that's the big thing here. These stories are good. The creative teams each do honestly a fantastic job telling the stories of their respective characters, but this is basically filler. It could have been a huge crossover on its own, honestly, that further down the line led to the Wrath of the First Lantern crossover, but instead, this entire thing is clearly just so that they can kill a few more issues as they set up that story. But don't get me wrong, for a comic that is so obviously just filler, it's actually pretty good. I think Simon Baz's introduction is handled really well. I think Guy's Fall from Glory is possibly my favorite Guy Gardner story ever. The setup here for the payoff to Atrocity's internal conflict in the next story is spot on, and believe me, I'll have a lot to say about Kyle Rayner from this series in the next one in the next video. But it's also frustrating that this is all just setup, and yet it's still very important that you read it so you can read the next story. So while there is a lot of good, it's really hard to ignore the bad. So what that basically means is that I'm giving this series a recommendation level of medium. I think my conclusion is that you're probably better off reading the individual series so you can really understand each group here, but whether you do or don't, it's overall a pretty strong story. The collected edition gets 1 Blue Lantern ring, which here we're saying is just slightly better than average, you know, because of Rainbow Order and everything. Because I'm trying to be fair. There are 16 freaking issues in this collection, plus a full annual and part of another annual, and then there's still a fairly good sized collection of bonus art in the back. But you better believe that many pages comes with one hell of a steep price tag, so, you know, I still feel like value versus value, it's overall better to get the individual series collections, but maybe that's just me. I'm Crazy Ramsey. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. As I said, next week we should be launching into Wrath of the First Lantern, and then from there jumping into Lights Out and then Godhead, all continuing the various crossovers of the Green Lantern comics throughout the New 52 era. And that should take us all the way through August. So if you liked this video, or you're interested in those videos, or you just want to help out the channel, then please use your fantastic willpowers to click those like and subscribe buttons so you could be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.